A lot of you know me because I really like Warhammer and I talk about Warhammer a lot, but some of you may realize I'm actually a weeb. I love anime, and probably my favorite genre of anime is Mecha-Anime, such as Neon Genesis. And so when I get an email from a company called Best Hobby saying they're making a tabletop game called Zeo Genesis, they had my intrigue. But when they said they were making a game based on 90s manga with Gav Thorpe and Andy Chambers, they had my attention. And if you don't know who Gav Thorpe and Andy Chambers are, well, here's Subway Surfers, because clearly you're too young. Before I go any further, I want to make sure this is super clear that this is a sponsored preview. It isn't a review of anything, so do take everything with a pinch of salt, but there is a link to the game found in the description below. Thanks to Best Hobby for sponsoring this video. I've been very, very fortunate to be sent a early access beta version of the starter box of a new game that's coming out called Zeo Genesis by Best Hobby, with the narrative written by the legendary Gav Thorpe and the game design by Andy Chambers. Those are two very large names in Warhammer's history in both fantasy battles and 40k, and you can definitely feel that in this game with, they're not calling it an anime game, but it's got an anime twang. It's like an anime accent almost. And today I wanted to tell you about the game while I paint up one of the miniatures, one of the Guard Corps Zeos, which I'll get into shortly, and try out one of these tricks that people seem to use that I think will actually work really well if we're trying to go for a super bright, high saturation anime vibe. So let's take a look at the miniatures. In the box, there are two opposing Zeo units, and Zeo refers to the big tactical war suits controlled by pilot, and then Zeo attendant support units. So these are the little guys. These aren't in the war suits, the smashy war destructive mecha things. There's actually loads of really cool information. There's like a bit on their website called Chambers Guide to Defense, which is a very original name for someone who's writing it, but there's loads of like really cool concept art, and it goes into like more detail about the background of the setting and the lore and the general like things that are happening in this world and the units and factions that are in there. But there are two opposing Zeo units, the Pact and the Guard Corps. The Pact represent a group of humans striving to grow and expand, maybe even find a way out of the human world. They are aligned with a movement known as the People's Galactic, a more freeform coalition of explorers and thinkers. The Pact consists of an Amarok Master Form Zeo, the Bokujin drone controller, the two Boku drones, two Warper drones, and a Skirp Scutter heavy weapon support unit. And then there are the Guard Corps. They are the quasi-military wing, the police forces, if you will, of the homogeny movement. They are more focused on human potential on the world we have and driving central rule. And that's what we're going to be painting today. We're going to be painting one of the Zeo form units of the Guard Corps. The Guard Corps is made up of two Stormer Zeos, an A and B variant, three Guard Corps troopers, a Tech Ops, and a Hyena Pursuit drone. Should have been hyena. Doggies. The miniatures that we're looking at today are 3D printable prototypes. The miniatures will be injection molded in the USA. However, they are planning on making 3D printable or STL files of these miniatures available as part of the GameFound campaign, which, as I mentioned, is a link in the description if you want to see more info. And if you follow the campaign early, you get a free gift. And it looks really cool. I want one. Super Samurai Robot Dude. It's sick. So I started off building the Stormer. Now what's nice is that even though these are prototypes, they do come with a bunch of options. I imagine you'll have very similar options in their main release. But once I'd chosen which gun I was going to use and which head I was going to use, purely going off vibe, I didn't know what any of them did at this point. I went to clean the models. Now even though they will be hard plastic, with 3D printed miniatures, just be careful when you are sanding them. I'm using a sanding sponge at 600 grit just to get rid of any support marks or any layer lines that may be left, because sometimes there's some aliasing on the miniatures. I'm just using a soft grit sandpaper or sanding sponge. Just be careful of obviously the dust because it is resin after all. And to put them together, I used Colour Forge super glue and super glue activator. People keep asking me what I'm spraying onto the model with super glue. It's super glue activator. It's so good. There's a link in the description. It's honestly, I'm a changed person. I will never use super glue without activator ever again. So it's just a case of gluing the miniature together, posing it how I quite liked it, and then stick it on one of the bases. I think they're about 65mm, these bases, so you can kind of like get the vibe of how big this miniature is. And then I use some basing bits from Goon Master Games just for some random basing pieces to put onto the bases. And then use some basing paste just to give it an overall coverage, and then sprinkle some sand on top just to get like a fairly neutral warfare battlefield base. I think we can like mix it up quite a bit later to try and make it look really cool. And finally, I primed the miniature in matte black by the Colour Forge. If you want to grab any hobby tools I'm using or any spray paints, there's links down in the description. I really appreciate it. So this is the thing now. All of those damn YouTubers always talk about Tamiya X for F2 or flat white, and this might be the secret weapon before the real secret weapon to make it look anime. So I've heard a lot about Tamiya Flat White. It's a really interesting paint because it is an acrylic paint. However, you're supposed to use the official acrylic paint thinner, X20A. Contains propanol, 2-butyl ethanol and butyl acetate, which is interesting because that's also a similar chemical makeup to Tamiya thin cement. So what's weird is you're actually thinning the paint with something that's very similar to plastic glue. There's a fun fact for you. However, by following the instructions, using the proper thinner and using this paint, I got the smoothest white I have ever used. I was changed when I used Super Glue Activator for the first time. Now this is the white undercoat paint for Zenithal or whatever. This paint with this thinner is glorious. It's so nice. As you can see, it goes on super smooth through the airbrush, and what I'm doing is I'm underpainting the miniature. I'm preparing it for another color over the top. So what we're doing is making all the interesting parts super whites, and then all the things that are like not quite in your face, they're going to get like a light gradient to gray to black, etc. And as you can see, it's blowing out the camera because it is just so flat, but also it's not really very speckly, and it's very, very smooth, even though again it's an acrylic paint. It's not even fancy, it's just a normal paint with some really good thinner that's designed for it. So I would highly recommend trying out this paint if you have an airbrush. Honestly, it's just crazy. It's crazy good. So then once I'd sprayed it, I'd oversprayed a little bit. So what I did then was went in with some black ink or black paint or whatever you've got to hand, and just reintroduce some shadows, because you want really harsh whites then going straight to black to get like a really interesting tone. So I went in and just shaded some bits. I shaded some recesses. I just recovered the bits that are kind of like a little bit oversprayed, you know. And then when I was happy with the airbrushing, I went back in with Tamiya White on my paintbrush, and I edge highlighted a lot of the bits that I'd now sprayed black and then oversprayed black. There's a balance here, right? So spray white on all the interesting bits, spray blacks in the shadows of the bits that aren't going to be the main color, and then use white to edge highlight, because then when you do spray the main color, which is going to be red in this instance, because we're using a transparent ink, this is a Liquitex red ink, what's essentially happening is because it's slightly transparent, where it is showing white, it is coming up super bright red, it's super poppy, it's super bright, it's super crazy, but then where it's black, it's really dark. So we're getting that really crazy, insane gradient by just spraying a bit of white, spraying a bit of black, and then spraying red over the top. No blending needed, no glazing, no nothing. And as you can see, where those white highlights or those edge highlights are, they've come up super bright red right next to where it was black, where it's like a dark red now, which is, you're just getting like insane pop really easily. Now, there were some bits that kind of like weren't super black, which kind of didn't really add a shadow. So all I did was add some black ink to the red ink, and then just went in and just sprayed those bits. So it's kind of like just a guesswork. I didn't have to do this step, but I feel like it just adds to the miniature a little bit and adds to some of the shadows. And if you want to deepen the shadows even more, you can just go in with really thin black ink and just lightly spray over them. Because the inks are so thin, they're so transparent, you are lightly building those tones rather than just spraying black paint, which would just cover the red underneath. We're not trying to do that, we're trying to tint the red back down. And then because we're working with inks, I would just varnish it straight after. I would gloss varnish it in this instance, but I would always recommend, once you've sprayed some inks on top, the thing is with inks is even when they're set, they can be reactivated really easily, especially if you're going to go in with like washes and stuff like that. Give it a quick gloss varnish, matte varnish, any varnish you've got, but just give it like a good coating just to protect the paint underneath. And then since I gloss varnished, I just fancied using some oil washes for a change. I just fancied painting something a little bit different, a little bit different vibe than I normally do. So I used a black and blue mixed together to make an oil wash with some thinners, and just recess shaded it as much as possible, and then use makeup sponges to clean up everything else afterwards. Because I've gloss varnished it, I get the capillary reaction, so it's really easy to wash. And the things with oil paints and oil washes, that you can activate them, you can wipe them away. It's a reductive painting style, right? You can add paint and then remove it really easily. If you're like, okay, that's too little, I'll add more. If it's too much, I can wipe it away, and if I can't wipe it away, I can reactivate it with some thinner on a brush and just wash it all away and start again. So I thought, I've gloss varnished it, why not go whole hog, you know? Well, the undersuit and the black parts, I'm going to be painting it all with Black Templar. Black Templar is a contrast paint by GW. It has like a blue tone to it. It's kind of like a really dark turquoise more than actual black. But we're painting that all over as an initial base coat on the gun, the undersuit, and then it really adds a separation to the red and makes it really stand out and look really cool. And I'm going to build up the highlights on the black using black and inky darkness initially, and then slowly adding 2 thin coats Trooper White to make a lighter and lighter highlight. And I'm trying to do super crisp, super clean highlights because of the nature of the miniature, the anime manga style. For the metallics, I'm base coating them all in Gun Grey by Vallejo, and then adding in some aluminum to highlight those parts. And then once I'm happy with the black parts and the silver parts, I'm going to wash them back down using my special black recipe, which I actually made a video about a couple of months ago. You should check it out. It's right here. It's there, that one. So I'm going to paint that all over the black parts and all over the metallic parts to shade them. And then I can go in, reintroduce some highlights. So then we get like a really nice blend from black that looks black up to like a light blue. I know in that video I said light blue's cringe, but I think this just looks nice. Again, it's comic books, right? They don't actually paint anything grey. Black is always blue. It's all about the context. For the guard core logo on the shoulder, I'm going to be base coating it in the Incubi and Trooper White highlight colour that I was using on the black as the base coat, and then adding in more Trooper White to build up on the highlights. So just basically take it to a white. I'm going for like some scratchy effect. Again, I'm just thinking, what would they do in a manga? They wouldn't base coat it all white and wash it. They'd do like scratchy colouring effect. It looks really cool. So I'm going to do that. Finally, I'm going in and reintroduce the highlights on the metallics using aluminium. And then I'm base coating anything that I'm going to do OSL. I fancy some green lights on this because I think that would really pop off with the red armor. I'm painting that with orc flesh contrast paint as a base coat initially, because when we do come and use the airbrush again to do light sources, having some green there already will help the colour pop earlier rather than having to overspray to get the colour to pop. That's most of the miniature done, but I'm going to do the base first. I'm going to base coat everything in black first, and then I'm going to paint the metallic stuff with gun grey or aluminum or whatever. It doesn't matter at this point, and then I'm just dry brushing it with a light grey, and then dry brushing it with a lighter grey straight afterwards. And then I saw this trick on Eons of Battle, shout out to Jay, great content creator, where he was mixing pigment powder, so in this case I'm using MIG's medium rust, and just mixing it with like flame proof and a little bit of water to make like a slurry. And then I painted this all over the base parts, anything that was on the base, and I put a little bit on the feet as well, because then you kind of get like the pigment aspect, but it also locks onto the base, because the problem with using pigments is you put it in and then they'll just forever fall off and make a right mess. Whereas I think this method, whilst doesn't look quite as like dusty or realistic, if you wanted to say that, it gets into the recesses and locks in. And what's nice is if you think there's too much, you can actually just use a wet brush to wash it off again, because there's no real medium holding it down. It's just locked in because of it's just set onto it. It's kind of like, it's like mud, right? It's like painting with mud. It locks in, but you can wash it off. So then I used like a really wet brush. I had a puddle where I thought it was a bit like too orange, and then I just like dabbed it off with a paper towel, and that got like a lot of it off. And I think that base looks really cool, but I'm actually going to like keep going. I'm going to use some Dirty Down Rust, which is a great product. Again, link in the description if you want to grab some. What you do is you warm up the bottle and the model for this, and it's essentially what they use on TV to make fake rust. And when it dries, it looks like real rust, and it's also water soluble. So if you kind of like add too much and there's too much rust, you can wash it off again with a wet paintbrush. So a lot of the base is just like slap some on, and then I'm like, oh, that's too much. I'm just going to use a wet paintbrush to take it all off again. But yeah, make sure you warm up the model and the bottle of liquid, because it's like not really paint. I don't really know what it is, but if you warm up both, it activates faster and better. And then when it's on the model, you can dry it with the hairdryer as well to make it activate even faster, and just like get this really, really cool rust effect. And then when I painted that, because I've done the base orange and the armors red, I started to think they kind of like blended together a little bit. So I used some Hellstorm red to just highlight the edges again. The red armor is the most important bit. I really want to make it pop, so I'm making it pop by doing this. And then it's time to finish the base. I just basically grabbed loads of tufting stuff out of a drawer, because I've just been collecting over the years, so just loads of random brands. There's some army painters, some gamers grass, etc. here. And I stuck these all over the base. Now obviously we've got this like city rubble, and then we got like these weird rocks. The thing is with this game, it isn't grimdark, so I kind of wanted to kind of make it look like it was kind of like overgrown. It was like rubbled, but like overtaken by nature again, which I thought was quite cool. Like, I only have a very surface level understanding of this background, but it doesn't scream fighting in dark cities all the time. It kind of feels like, in my head, it's kind of like post-apocalypse battlefields that are like overgrown again because the nature is like overtaken again. In my head, I'm thinking stuff like arguably not great Godzilla movies from Netflix, the anime ones, where they go back to Earth 2,000 years later and the buildings are still there, but they're all overgrown. And there's actually real places like this in Japan as well, which is really wild, to be honest. It's like, I would love to visit, but I saw like a video where there was like these old cities on islands that were kind of like abandoned, and the nature had like kind of like grown over and like retaken the buildings again. It's really cool, and that's like what I was thinking when I was making this base. It was like loads of rubble because it's kind of in the future, you know, and it's a bit sci-fi, but then I wanted to like make it look like way brighter and more colourful. because it's not grimdark, and that's kind of like where I was going with it. So then when I'd done the base, it was time for the object source lighting, or OSL. So I loaded up two thin coats emerald green to do initial blasting of where the light should hit, just kind of like covering where I've painted the orc flesh already all over the gun. I don't think it's an energy weapon. I think it's more like a shotgun, but I like to think it's powered by energy that's green. And I obviously painted the lenses as well. And then I went in with the second coat with ethereal green, just adding that to my airbrush just to kind of like keep it together and mix it together. Because the thing is, you don't want to go from color to color, you kind of want like a nice gradient. And then I added a little bit of Trooper White again. Trooper White is my favorite color, honestly, except for maybe the Tabiar Flat White. Trooper White is a really, really nice off-white color, and it's great for adding to highlights because because of the off-white nature of it, it doesn't desaturate it too much, which is cool. Then it was just a case of going in with Beal Tan Green as a wash around all of the green aspects in all the recesses, just to kind of like make the outer bits darker and make the middle bits pop. And then I went in with Ethereal Green and Trooper White as an edge highlight in all the green parts. Again, we've got the deep recesses that we just need to make the centers pop, especially in the middle of those lenses. And then it's a case of painting the base ring black, and we got ourselves our very first Storm and Zeo, which I think looks really cool. So this game isn't grimdark, which is like, again, I've already mentioned this, but they've kind of said it's not a grim or dark future. There's like stories about exploration and mystery set against the backdrop of humanity starting to face a coming war. And they said like when the game launches, it's mostly going to be like human versus humans, like different factions of human. But there is a new threat emerging. Furthermost, human systems have gone dark and its slipway has disappeared. So I imagine the idea is to start off with these two factions and then expand into something a little bit deeper. Maybe aliens, maybe something else. Maybe like Forerunner Halo-esque stuff. I don't know. It just sounds really, really cool, to be honest. Best Hobby also sent me an advanced copy of the playtest rules. This isn't obviously final. This is not what the rulebook looks like, but this is the playtest rulebook available. Zeo Genesis feels like a small skirmish game played on 2x2 or 3x3 boards, and it's a alternating activation economy. A kind of like I activate something, then you activate something until we've activated all of our miniatures, all of our units, and then we move on to the next round. But what interests me is they've said the game can be played in 30 to 45 minutes. Now, I think a lot of war games get really into the weeds, and those games can start taking a very long time to play, but something that can be played in 30 to 45 minutes feels kind of like that tipping point of kind of being an advanced board game, but it is kind of like a tabletop game, and that's what interests me. I could definitely see people do like organized events. It's kind of like having like a best of 3 in an hour and a half or 2 hours or something, which would be really cool. Imagine a best of 3 in like with like 3 games in a day. That'd be really cool if you're going to be able to play it that quickly. Now, as I said, it's an action economy game, and each miniature is going to be able to activate, and you'll be able to take some basic actions and then more advanced actions to get further in the game. Your basic actions include like run and gun, so move, shoot, move. You've got aimed fire, so stand still and shoot better. But what's interesting, even though it's a skirmish game, this has I can't beat around the bush. I think this has like what people think Warhammer should have, or what Warhammer has lost in over the years. This has rules for like firing arcs and getting better at shooting stuff in the back if you can outmaneuver them. It has rules for lower elevation and higher elevation, so if you're shooting down at something, you're going to be shooting better there rather than shooting up. And what's interesting, it uses a D10 system as well, which I think when you are playing a skirmish game, you're not rolling that many dice. A D10 can feel gives you a little bit more flavor in terms of rather than just sticking to a D6, especially when there's like this relies on a D10 with modifiers as like how to like hit and wound and damage and stuff, which sounds really cool. And that's just like the basic rules. You also have a large section which goes on to advanced rules. Now, I think the starter box comes with essentially 2 balanced lists against each other to get you started. When you do get into advanced rules, I believe you can start like building your own armies, bring in your own like number of Zeos and support units that go with them. And then it starts to get really granular. And like I said, missing that flavor that a lot of people are missing from Warhammer, such as like buying upgrades for your Zeos, by bringing physical structures with you, such as like data nodes, sensor arrays, field generators, etc., that you can deploy with your force. And for example, like a field generator will give you extra armor if you're really close to it. So obviously it's a field generator, it's a defensive measure. And so you're able to bring these extra like little structures with you. And then because you are bringing structures with your force, there's actually rules for how to like destroy structures or terrain on the battlefield, which honestly from a very quick glance of this, looks really cool. I've always wondered why, when I'm shooting cannons and laser guns and whatever across the battlefield, the buildings are always fine, even though usually when I arrive to the table or arrive to the board, the buildings are already messed up. And then there's even more stuff such as scenarios and stuff like that, which I don't want to go over everything. I don't want to keep droning on. And what I'd love you to do is go and check out the campaign using the link in the description on GameFound. It's a crowdfunding campaign. It isn't launching just yet, but this is kind of like a preview of the crowdfunding campaign. And what you can do, you can go ahead there and follow the campaign. And if you do, you also unlock a free miniature. If you do go ahead and pledge, you're going to get, I believe it's like an exclusive as part of like following the campaign, one of the Storm of Zeo, which was really cool. I really like the idea of this game. I really like the art style. I haven't played the game yet, but the rules system sounds really fun. And obviously when you've got some legendary designers such as Gav Thorpe and Andy Chambers backing it, it's something that everybody should be keeping an eye on. So thank you very much to Best Hobby for sponsoring this video. And thank you to you guys for watching. Again, check out the link in the description. Go follow the campaign and anything that I've used in this video. There's all links that you can find there. And yeah, hopefully I'll catch you next time. So thanks for watching. Thanks to my members. They're all down here. Absolutely beautiful people. And I'll catch you next time.